Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Peter Akbar once again with you. For a long time I couldn't upload videos on my channel for various reasons and tragedies in life. I lost my sister, but I'm back. I want to start right from there where I have left. I was responding to the video of Pious Fraud, and I have produced a couple of videos on that series, and in the same series this is my another video. In this video I'm going to focus on Eusebius, because Esther Dhanraj raises questions on the credibility of Eusebius. And after all, name calling and other things talking about Eusebius, she accuses that Eusebius lied and committed fraud and suppressed information and manipulated the history. That's the accusation she brings forth against Eusebius. And in the process, she quotes Edward Gibbon's, what he said about Eusebius, and then she also quotes to prove that Eusebius suppressed some information or he was not honest. So she quotes Eusebius' history, ecclesiastical history, chapter 8 from verse second paragraph and so forth. She quotes. So we are going to look at those arguments and see what exactly the truth is. So let's hear first what she says, then I will respond to it.
Our next confessor is the most important figure in the history of Christianity. He is called Eusebius of Caesarea. Eusebius abused the power of his pen by inventing lies about the biblical texts, characters, and events. Eminent historians, both critics and defenders, have called Eusebius names like the gravest of church historians, as suggested by Edward Gibbon, a 17th century English historian. He was also called a very dishonest man, or one of the most prolific forgers and liars of his age of the church. Eusebius was also called a notorious author of a great many falsehoods. Ecclesiastical means relating to the church or its clergy. In his Ecclesiastical History, Book 8, Chapter 2, Eusebius writes, "But it is not our place to describe the sad misfortunes which finally came upon the Christians, as we do not think it proper to record their divisions and unnatural conduct to each other before the persecution. Wherefore, we have decided to relate nothing concerning them, except things in which we can vindicate the divine judgment. But we shall introduce into this history in general only those events which may be useful first to ourselves and afterwards to posterity." Eusebius was telling the scribes, whom he employed to create church history, that they were not supposed to report any misfortune or disagreements that they were having among themselves, or the natural conduct that they showed to each other. They were to report as history only those events that could benefit them first. All other events were to be concealed.
All right, you heard her. So before I could respond to what she said about Eusebius, I want to give you a small lesson, or I should say a tip, an instruction within formal logic. In logic, we have logical fallacies. Within logical fallacies, one of the fallacies is fallacy of accent. Fallacy of accent results when a statement is spoken in a tone of voice not intended for it, or the fallacy can arise or result when certain words in it wrongly accented or stressed. Third, certain words or even whole sentences and paragraphs are taken out of context and thus given an emphasis they were not meant to have. This is called fallacy of accent. Now, why I am talking to you about this fallacy of accent is because this is the trick that Esther Kamakshi Dhanraj cunningly plays. Now, if you look at the quotation that appears on her screen, it is from chapter 8, of Eusebius Ecclesiastical History, and it is translated by Reverend Christian Frederick Cruz, an 18th century American priest. So this is, like you see on the screen, this is what it appears. Now when we read it the way it appears, it indeed looks like that something mischief is going on out here, because it says, but it is not our place to describe the sad misfortunes which finally came upon the Christians, as we do not think it proper to record their divisions and unnatural conduct to each other before the persecution. Wherefore, we have decided to relate nothing concerning them except things in which we can vindicate the divine judgment, but we shall introduce into this history that I am writing in general only those events which may be useful first to ourselves and afterwards to posterity. Now the translation that appears on her screen, it is not the translation by Reverend Christian Frederick Cruz. It is the translation by Arthur Cushman MacGifford. He lived in 1800s, 1861, so forth. So that is his translation, and especially the Catholic Encyclopedia uses his translation. So what we are going to do is, first of all, look at the Eusebius's words that are quoted in proper context, so that we can understand better what is it that Eusebius is suppressing or not revealing. According to Esther Kamakshi Dhanraj, he was a notorious, evil and gravest historian. So let's see, what was he not mentioning, what was he not writing, by placing these words in context. Now here is the context. Now I am quoting from Ecclesiastical History, translated by Reverend C.F. Cruz, that is Reverend Frederick Cruz. So here we go with the translation in the context. This is what it says. Now you see the blue lines, which is the blue lines which you see on the screen are the verses quoted by Esther Dhanraj. But if you look at the missing portions between two lines, the quoted lines, there is information, and within that information the answer lies. What is the answer? I'll tell you. But it is not for me to describe fully the sorrowful calamities which they, that is the Christians, endured, since neither does it belong to me to record the dissensions and follies which they exercised against each other before the persecution. Now wait a minute. When Eusebius is saying before the persecution, he has something to say. But for that we need to read chapter 1. What happened before the persecution broke at the time of Eusebius? But we'll come to that in a short while. But let's complete reading it so that we can understand better in context. Hence also we have purposed not to extend our narration beyond the events in which we perceive the just judgment of God. Now listen carefully the rest of the statement. It says, hence also we shall not make mention of those that were shaken by the persecution, nor of those that suffered shipwreck in their salvation, and of their own accord were sunk into the depths of the watery gulf. Means, here the answer lies here. What was he not writing? there were Christians who were behaving badly. We will come to that very soon. And some Christians, because of the persecution, they left their faith in Christ, or they left Christianity. So Eusebius is saying that we will not talk about them because it won't benefit the church. It won't benefit the church talking about someone's faith being shipwrecked. So for emphasis again, I'll read what Eusebius says. But Esther Kamakshi Dhanraj cunningly removes this portion and clubs both the lines together so that she can show something mischievous thing is happening here. So he says again, hence also we shall not make mention, we will not mention of those that were shaken by the persecution, means the people who could not tolerate the persecution and left Christianity. So we will not mention about them, nor of those that suffered shipwreck in their salvation. Again, shipwreck, Apostle Paul uses in his epistles, talking about those people who left the faith, left Christian faith. So here Eusebius is saying that we will not mention about them. And then he writes further, suffered shipwreck in their salvation, and of their own accord were sunk into the depths of the watery gulf. But we shall only, upon the whole, introduce those events in our history that may be profitable first to us of the present day and hereafter to the posterity. So what Eusebius is saying is that talking about, mentioning about those people who left the Christian faith because of the persecution, it doesn't profit the church. In what way it doesn't profit the church? Because some people gave up their faith because they couldn't tolerate the persecution. So this will not benefit the church. Then what sort of stories or what sort of the events which will benefit the church? Those victorious stories where people gladly suffered for the name of Christ and died even at the cost of death. They did not leave the faith in Christ. Now stories and events like this will benefit the church. So Eusebius, since he is writing church history, he is not obligated to write about those people who left the faith. So he didn't mention about them, or he didn't bother to write about them. And he chose to write only those victorious martyrs' story or events. So then in the final portion of the paragraph he says, now let us proceed to describe in a condensed account the holy conflicts of the witnesses of divine truth. Means those people, the holy conflicts of the witnesses of divine truth, those people who suffered for the sake of truth, about them I will write. Now what I don't understand is that how Eusebius is accused for suppressing something, because he is plain, he is telling his intentions. Now in what way he lied, in what way he forged, or in what way he committed any mistake, because he is clear in his intentions while writing. Now what was the misconduct that was happening? And to understand this, we need to read chapter 1. Now so far we read chapter 2. If we are reading chapter 1, it is clearly mentioned here that prior to persecution, at the time of Eusebius, the Christians enjoyed freedom. Christians were even getting jobs in under the imperial, the government, and they were enjoying freedom. But later in chapter 1, Eusebius says that because of this peace, they were constructing churches. But something was happening, and he talks about it. Now this is what he says. But when, by reason of excessive liberty, we sunk into negligence and sloth, one envying and reviling another in different ways, and we were almost, as it were, on the point of taking up arms against each other, and were assailing each other with words as with darts and spears. Prelates envying against prelates, and people rising up against people, and hypocrisy and dissimulation had arisen to the greatest height of malignity. Then the divine judgment, which usually proceeds with a lenient hand, whilst the multitudes were yet crowding into the church, with gentle and mild visitations, began to afflict in episcopacy. Now, what is he saying here? Prior to persecution, the church was growing, and prior to persecution, though the church was growing, pastors were fighting against each other. They were reviling, abusing, or accusing each other, and they were behaving wrongly with each other because they were exchanging words as though the words are spears and darts. And because of this, Eusebius says, God's judgment came upon the church. Okay? It will become more clear as we read further. He says, the persecution having begun with those brethren that were in the army, and as if destitute of all sensibility, we were not prompt in measures to appease and propitiate the deity. Some indeed, like atheists, regarding our situation as unheeded and unobserved by providence, added one wickedness and misery to another. Some that appeared to be our pastors, deserting the law of piety or pity, were inflamed against each other with mutual strifes, only accumulating quarrels and threats, rivalship, hostility, and hatred to each other, only anxious to assert the government as a kind of sovereignty for themselves. Now, this is what the conflicts going on between the pastors at the time of Eusebius. There was freedom, church was growing, and they were constructing churches, but at the same time, bishops, pastors were fighting among each other with exchanging words which are not good, which are not according to the Christian faith. Now, Eusebius says, I don't want to talk about all this. Secondly, I also don't want to talk about those people who left the faith in Jesus Christ. But I am going to talk about only that event or those events which will benefit the church in upbuilding of their faith and encouraging the church who are faithful, so that they will endure the persecution and stand for Christ. So, if you want, now we will go to chapter 2 and read so that we have a good clarity here. So, this is what in chapter 2, first paragraph. All this has been fulfilled in our day, when we saw with our own eyes our houses of worship thrown down from their elevation, the sacred scriptures of inspiration committed to the flames in the midst of the markets, the shepherds of the people basely concealed here and there, means they were running here and there, some of them ignominiously captured and the sport of their enemies, when also, according to another prophetic declaration, contempt was poured out upon their rulers, and he has made them to err in a trackless bypath and where there is no road. Then Eusebius says, but it is not for me to describe fully the sorrowful calamities which they endured, since neither does it belong to me to record the dissensions and follies follies which they exercised against each other. Means the pastors were fighting against each other. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to mention. It is not for me. So against each other before the persecution could break out at our time. Hence also we have purposed not to extend our narration beyond the events in which we perceive the just judgment of God. Now what is he saying is that because these people were fighting among each other, the judgment of God upon us through this persecution is just. That's what he says. Then he says, hence also we shall not make mention of those that were shaken by the persecution, nor of those that suffered shipwreck in their salvation of their own accord, were sunk into the depths of the watery gulf. Now there is a clarity here. The clarity is, what was it that Eusebius was not bothered to write? And what was it that he wants to write so that it will benefit the church? So, now you know the truth. Edward Gibbons, in the history of the decline and fall of Roman Empire, volume 1, in chapter 16, the title of the chapter is Conduct Towards the Christians from Nero to Constantine. From Nero to Constantine, in this chapter, he wanted to talk about the Christians who persecuted under Roman Empire. Now, while talking about this, he says, in this general view of the persecution, which was first authorized by the edicts of Diocletian, I have purposely refrained from describing the particular sufferings and deaths of the Christian martyrs. Particular as in, he wanted to narrate the stories vividly, the particular sufferings and deaths, as in one after the other. He wants that clarity. Gibbon wanted that. But he couldn't get it from the history of Eusebius. Deaths of the Christian martyrs. It would have been an easy task from the history of Eusebius, from the declamations of Lactantius, and from the most ancient Acts to collect a long series of horrid and disgustful pictures and to fill pages with racks and scourges, with iron hooks and red hot beds, and with all variety of tortures which fire and steel, savage bees and more savage executioners could inflict upon the human body. Now Edward Gibbons wanted these particular sufferings, how Christians suffered with specificity, how they suffered from the bees, how they suffered on the iron chairs, because Nero was persecuting Christians. Christians were, their hands, their limbs were chopped off and burnt right in front of them, and they were made to sit on red hot chairs. And they were persecuted. And Edward Gibbons says that he uses one word. Let me read further. These melancholy scenes might be enlivened by a crowd of visions and miracles destined either to delay the death, to celebrate the triumph, or to discover the relics of those canonized saints who suffered for the name of Christ. But I cannot determine what I ought to transcribe till I am satisfied how much I ought to believe. The gravest of the ecclesiastical historians. Now she, Esther Kamakshi Dhanraj, doesn't have a clue what the gravest means. If you open a dictionary and read it, when it is used as an adjective, it means a crucial and important historian. Like Eusebius himself indirectly confesses that he has related whatever might redound to the glory of the church, and that he suppressed all that could tend to disgrace of religion. Now Edward Gibbons was saying that he only wrote what benefits the church and skipping those things which doesn't benefit the church. Now, when you look at Edward Gibbon's statements and when you read the words of Eusebius in context, in the light of chapter 1 and chapter 2, it is clear that Eusebius, was not mentioning about the rivalries between the pastors, the conflicts between the pastors and bishops, and the people who have given up their faith due to persecution. He was not talking about that, and he was only he decided to write only those things which will uplift the faith of the Christians of their time and also the time to come. Now, once you take out few portions of Eusebius' words and attach them and give a meaning to it which author didn't intend, that's a cunning device. If you do these tactics or implement these tactics, you can prove anybody a fraud and liar. Now, you see, in the preface of the book 8, Eusebius clearly mentions that having already related the successions of the apostles in 7 books, in this 8th, we consider it necessary to record for the benefit of posterity the events of our own times that deserve a more than superficial narration, and our account therefore shall begin with this. Now, what is he writing? Eusebius is writing a church history of his time when he lived. Now, say for example, a Christian doesn't know anything about Eusebius. For me, when I became a Christian, I knew nothing about Eusebius. All I read was the Bible. I read the Bible and I became a Christian. Now, the question is that if, say, Eusebius is the worst person in the history, how does that affect Christianity? Now, the thing is that nobody reads Eusebius and becomes a Christian. Everybody reads the Bible and become a Christian. Now, even if Eusebius, whatever the information that he didn't write in his history, it least affects the Bible, because Bible is separate and Eusebius's ecclesiastical history is different. But Esther Kamakshi Dhanraj says that he manipulated about the characters of the Bible, he manipulated, he tampered and so forth the biblical characters. That is nonsense, because at the time of Eusebius there were many bishops, Christians out there who were opposing Eusebius also in the doctrinal issues. So don't you think they would have raised concerns and they would have objected Eusebius if he had tampered with the biblical narratives or biblical history? No. So they would have raised objections to Eusebius, but they didn't do it. So my friends, before this I tell to all the Christian friends as well as my Hindu friends, before you could listen or before you could arrive at any conclusion listening to Esther Dhanraj's videos, I sincerely request you to read the references in its context. Okay, so hope you understand, hope you understood what Eusebius meant by his words. So very soon I'll be back with another video. Thank you.